Hey, what's up YouTube? This is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over the best rogue decks for the Chaos Origins format. Now that we've had a few events, we can kind of see how the other non-meta decks in the format have been doing. And so I thought it'd be a perfect time to go over some of the more sleeper or underrated picks. Before we get started, just to quickly go over the tiers, keep in mind that these tiers are relative to like other rogue decks or the decks that are outside of tier 1, so a strong pick here may not equate to a strong tier 1 pick. Alright, so without any further ado, let's start off by talking about Labrynth. Labrynth hasn't seen any results recently, and I think that's for good reason. Honestly, I don't think this deck is very good at the moment. There are just so many decks that can just straight up gas through the Labrynth board even if it gets to go first. While it does have a okay grind game, I think there are decks like Brand or Sky Striker that can just do the grind game much better than Labrynth could. So for that reason, I would say Labrynth is probably like an okay playable deck. Like, you can take it to locals and probably still do okay. Now Artmage, on the other hand, I think is going to be one of the best rogue decks that we have at the moment. And also keep in mind that when I say rogue deck, I don't necessarily mean it's a deck that's like bad. I just classify every deck that I didn't talk about in my meta decks tier list here as a quote-unquote rogue deck, so do keep that in mind. In terms of Artmage, I would say Artmage is one of the most underrated decks that we have at the moment. It's able to take full advantage of the Power Patron engine. Not to mention the Artmage cards themselves also play really well into common hand traps like Fua. It does have a bit of a problem, I think, into a card like Perulia or into a card like Droll at times. But I would say that because it has such a high potential ceiling with those Power Patron cards, and the fact that some of their cards are actually not even that bad going second in terms of an engine, this is one of the most sleeper or underrated picks for this upcoming format. Next up, we got Blue Eyes. I would say Blue Eyes probably also goes squarely in the playable tier. I mean, maybe the only thing that has really going for it at the moment, I think, is that it can play a fair number of hand traps, and its engine is okay, I guess, by today's standards. I think it just kind of got power crept naturally by like some of the other better decks that we have at the moment. And while I do think that it can still end on like decent boards like Seals plus like Spirit Dragon plus like Drill Beam, I ultimately think that this deck's engine just isn't powerful enough going second. And even though that it can play a lot of hand traps, like, why would you just play a better hand trap deck instead of something like this? Next up, we got DDD. I would say DDD's prop goes in the decent tier, D for decent. It did get a top 32, I believe, at one of the earlier YCSs, but I think that was more attributed to the pilot being good as opposed to the deck actually being that great. But that being said, I do think that out of all the rogue picks, this deck is not terrible. It does have the potential to play through a fair number of those low impact hand traps. It can kind of suffer a bit into those higher impact hand traps like the Charmies or Droll at times, but its end board is one of those that should generally be pretty unbreakable for most decks if it's able to get there. It is a combo deck that's able to play fairly competently under a lot of the lower impact hand traps, so I think that a good pilot paired with a bit of luck going their way could end up taking this deck kind of far in a big tournament. I also wouldn't be surprised if most people don't even know what these cards do, so that's also another advantage of not only DDD but also all these rogue decks if you do choose to play it. Most players are not going to really be able to know how to stop you, and so you can use that to your advantage. Next up, we got an Enneacraft, and I think Enneacraft is also a deck that's like decent. The only reason I'm hesitant to put in the strong pick is because sometimes when you're playing this deck, it seems like your opponent's just going to walk into every single one of your interactions that you have face down, and it'll look like the best deck ever. But in the other times, if you play against someone who actually knows what Enneacraft is doing or knows what Enneacraft has access to, they're going to be able to play around most of the interactions pretty well, honestly, and there's nothing you can really do about it as the Enneacraft player. So I think that this deck kind of capitalizes on a knowledge gap when people don't really know what the cards do. I think it has some chance of sneaking wins here or there, but I wouldn't consider this a super strong pick out of all these decks here. Next up, we got Earth Machine, and Earth Machine generally, from what I've seen, is played as like the FTK version with like triple Gustav Max. This style of deck obviously is going to be very scary. It probably just goes in decent tier just for the fact alone it has that FTK potential. If you ever get paired up against a deck that doesn't have not that much non-engine room, or you play against a deck that's like playing breakers only, or your opponent just simply doesn't draw the right combination of hand traps or enough hand traps to stop you, the fact that this deck can just end the game right away is definitely something you need to be aware of. You know, that being said though, this deck is not without its issues. It does play quite a lot of cards you don't necessarily want to draw, and of course you're not always going to be able to get to the FTK board 100% of the time, and when you're not able to FTK your opponent, well, the deck just doesn't really do that much. So I'll say that this is definitely a very scary deck if you lose the die roll to it and don't draw enough hand traps, or you're playing a deck that doesn't have enough non-engine. So I would almost say for that reason alone, it kind of shoots it up into the decent tier. Next we got Magnet Warrior. I think Magnet Warrior is also one of those combo decks. It sort of feels like DDD where it's able to play through a lot of those low impact hand traps pretty well. They have a card that is literally Mathematic Circular, being able to send 2 cards to the graveyard to summon itself out. I think similar to DDD, it's going to suffer a lot from those higher impact hand traps like Droll, Charmies. It's going to severely limit the ceiling of this deck. So I was feel like it sort of falls in a similar boat as DDD. Like, it's a good combo deck if it's able to go off. I ultimately don't think this deck is going to be one of the best options out there, although it is one that could still do well at a big tournament. Next up, we got Lunalight, and Lunalight has kind of fallen off pretty hard from a couple of formats ago where it was considered one of the most dominant decks in the format. I think the biggest reason for Lunalight's fall off is that a lot of people have started playing cards like Santa Claus or Kaijus in their side deck just because of how well it matches up into, let's say, like the Power Patron FTK deck or against like the Ritual of Light and Darkness deck. People are naturally playing those cards in their side deck now, and that makes it so Lunalight's game plan of just summoning out Liger Dancer gonna be pretty problematic in a format where everyone has access to those Kaijus in their side deck already. Beforehand, you could make the argument that Lunalight didn't care about hand traps like Fua because they can just simply play through it and it can simply give the opponent like 10 cards and still end on double Liger Dancer and win the game off the fact that opponent couldn't out a Liger Dancer anyways. And now I think Lunalight does have a pretty big Fua weakness because, well, people are playing those cards in their side deck, and the Lunalight player isn't going to be able to safely give them a bunch of cards while setting up their full end board. And so for all those reasons, I'll say Lunalight kind of falls into like the decent category. Obviously, if your opponent doesn't see the out to it, doesn't see like Fua, doesn't see the Santa Claus or Kaijus, like Liger Dancer alone is going to be enough to win games. So for that reason, I would say the deck is still okay, but it definitely has a lot more issues than it did before. Next up, we got Orcust. I always found Orcust to be an interesting deck because of how many different ways I've seen people play it. Like, I've seen people play the Azumina cards in it, I've seen people play the Mitsurugi cards in it, even Orcust as like a pure deck. So there are a couple of different ways to build this, but I think in general, the Orcust engine now is still okay. His one-card combos are still pretty powerful, ending on quite a few disruptions with very good follow-up as well. And if it is able to go off uninterrupted, just one Orcust card alone can end on a pretty solid end board that's very difficult for a lot of decks to break. And paired with the fact that it can play a lot of those supplementary engines like Azumina or Mitsurugi to like cover for some of the deck's weaknesses, I do think that Orcust is one of those better rogue picks that we have at the moment. I don't think it's better than a deck like Artmage, but I do think that out of all the rogue decks that we have at the moment, Orcust is one of the ones I feel like, since you do have the option to raise your ceiling significantly with those additional engines, and the fact that the Orcust engine is fairly decent even alone, even without any other engines, I would say it is one of those stronger rogue picks that we have. Of course, this deck is not without its issues. It's going to suffer pretty hard into a card like Fool. I will say it does play around cards like Purulia and Droll fairly well, but the fact that everyone is going to still be on Fools can kind of be a problem for this deck. And because people are still playing Bystials, DD Crow, cards like that for decks like Branded, this deck is also going to get caught in the crossfire a little bit. But that being said, though, I still think it's one of the better rogue decks that we have at the moment. Next up, we got Darklord. I say the Darklord engine itself is not terrible, and they have a pretty good fusion monster that's able to set like multiple spells and traps. They literally have a Darklord card that searches a forbidden quick play spell, which is honestly pretty cool. You can search like Crown to make sure you survive. Not to mention, since the Darklords are Dark Fairies, they pair very well with the Power Patron spell, where they're able to add any Dark Fairy from the deck to the hand while taking full advantage of the Power Patron engine. So I do think that the Darklord deck actually has quite a lot going for it. So I think for all of those reasons, I would say Darklord probably goes like near the bottom of strong rogue pick in my opinion. It's definitely a deck that can be super scary, and while I personally don't have that much experience with the deck, from what I've seen so far, the Power Patrons do give it a much higher ceiling, and the Darklord cards themselves play fairly well into a lot of the common hand traps as well. Next up, we got Gem Knight. I'm fairly sure it can still FTK as far as I know. I don't know if the combo is viable, but I'm sure that's something they can still do. But I'm mainly talking about the Gem Knight deck when it's going, like the going second Gem Knight deck that we saw like a year ago at Nats, where it ended up, where it just told the opponent to go first, and then try to break their board and OTK them. I think it's always going to be scary playing a deck that just blinds second. And so inherently, I can't really say a deck that does that is a very strong pick, because it's going to rely a lot more on luck or good variance going your way compared to a lot of these other decks. Because a good portion of the time when your opponent does go first, a lot of things are not going to be in your control. You're not necessarily always going to draw the right hand traps or combination of board breakers to break their board. And so some games are just over before you can even do anything. That being said, though, like the quality of the Gem Knight cards are still very good. The deck can still be very scary, putting up very easily putting up OTKs if they're able to shut the opponent off from building a full board or just breaking their board with board breakers. So I do feel like there's at least some potential with the Gem Knight deck. Vanquish Soul, I think, has... Someone did mention this on my tier list, on my meta tier list video, and personally, I don't think Vanquish Soul is one of the better decks that we have for the moment. I don't think the deck is terrible by any means. Like, if you do take it to a tournament, there is a world I could see you doing well with it. But the conditions for that to happen, I think, fault to you having positive variants. I'll say that one thing this deck still has going for it is the fact that it can super high roll your opponent, or like you just play into a matchup where the canines are very good. Like I do think that there are times where Canine Vanquish Soul is going to feel insane, but then there are other times as well where you're just not going to draw the right combination of hand traps, or like the canine cards are just going to be dead in certain matchups as well. So overall, I would say that Canine Vanquish Soul is an okay deck. It's not a bad deck by any means, but ultimately, I wouldn't be able to confidently say it's one of the better decks out there, because again, it does rely a bit on you having some positive variants go your way. Now, Canine Crystron, on the other hand, I think unfortunately is not very good at the moment. It's one of those decks that once again it struggles so much into a card like Fulos. With the loss of Canine and Roy as well, it does lose one of its best starters / extenders. And while you can still play like the Canine Crystron deck like it was before, I really don't think it's that great of a deck at the moment. Next up, we got Odion. I think that Odion is also a deck that's similar to Labrynth, where your opponent, a lot of the times, the best decks at the moment can sometimes just straight up gas through your board unless you hard draw a floodgate of some kind. Like the Odion engine itself, even when it is able to go first, yeah, you can put up a couple of Apotheosis to negate your opponent's cards, but those are interactions that a lot of decks have very easy ways to play around. Like they can remove their cards from the board, they can pop the Apotheosis before it's able to summon it out, for example. And similar to Labrynth, it is going to struggle a lot going second unless it very specifically sees, like, let's say like Sphere Mode plus evenly or something like that. The engine of both these like trap decks are just not very good when going second, and I would say that for Odion to win, it probably needs to be going first a lot of the times and it's going to need to win game 1 and 3. Next up, we got Synchron. Synchron is also one of those very scary combo decks that when it's able to go off, it's able to set up a board with so much disruption. Like they actually are able to set up Omni Negates, which not many of these decks are able to do, so that's one thing it has going for it. It also has access to Junk Speeder, which is probably one of the most insane cards I've ever read. But the big problem I have with Synchron is that it has to play so many bad cards in this deck for it to really fulfill its game plan. Out of all the decks on this list, I would say it's probably the deck that has to play the most number of engine requirements for it to really be able to perform to its maximum potential. I think I have to put this deck at the very bottom decent just because when it is able to go off, when things do go smoothly, it is able to set up a board that's pretty unbreakable. But similar to all the other decks in this tier, there is that weakness of like common hand drops like let's say Droll or Fuelos. And Synchron also has the additional problem of the fact that it has to play a lot of those bad cards in their deck as well for the deck to even function. So I think Synchron can be a very scary combo deck when you do, let's say, lose the die roll against it and you don't see like the right number of hand traps. But it is a deck I wouldn't be too worried about because I do feel like this deck is inherently just going to be flawed because of the fact that it has to play so many bricks. Next up, we got Fire King. I think Fire King is still like a playable deck, I guess, at a local level. It's not like the cards are bad by any means, but I just don't feel like the Fire King interactions are gonna ever be good enough to stop your opponent. And while yes, this deck is very good against those common hand traps like Fua, Droll, that we have running around the format at the moment, I just don't think his engine is powerful enough to keep up with the rest of the metagame. It's not like one of these decks in the decent tier where it's able to do something pretty unfair, like, oh, if I get to pop off or if I high roll my opponent, I just win the game. Yeah, this deck just is one of the most fair decks that we have at the moment, and that just isn't a good thing for it to be competitively viable. Like, you still play cards like Impulse, you can still pair it with like the Jirac cards to get a board wipe. I ultimately don't think that the Fire King engine is good enough to continue competing at the highest level just because of its power level. Next we got Mermail. I would say Mermail is also one of those decks that's like pretty decent. If it gets to go first, it can hand loop you with a card like Moon Glacia. It can look at your hand with a card like Minstrel and rip the most important hand trap out of your hand. Going second, its engine is also not bad as well. It has cards like the Storming Atlantean, which can send a card like Dragoons for cost. You can send a card like Marksman for cost to always guarantee you get value if your opponent has a way to interact with the card. Mermail just falls into the same boat as a lot of these combo decks, where yeah, if it gets to go off, its combo is probably going to win them the game, but it is going to struggle into those like more common hand traps. Heck, and Mermail even has an additional thing going for it compared to like some of these other combo decks, in my opinion, where its engine is actually not even bad going second, but I just think its weakness to those common hand traps is just too much for it to really be able to be successful in this upcoming format. And not to mention, it's also one of the decks that doesn't have the most room for non-engine, so that can kind of be an issue as well. Despite all that though, I would say Mermail's, out of all these decks in the decent tier, it is probably one of the better ones, but it's again a deck that has a lot of flaws in my opinion. Next up, we got Exosister. One of the biggest things Exosister has going for it is that it can play a card like Shifter. Shifter is still one of the best cards that we have in the game, and it is going to be a blowout against most of the other decks out there. Not to mention, when it is able to go off, it's able to set up an end board that is fairly scary. Shout out to Evan. He did cook me with it once at locals. Exosister's engine is also not bad when it's able to go first. Magnifica is still a pretty scary card. The Exosister spell and traps are also pretty solid as well, being able to hit cards out of your graveyard. I still think the biggest problem with Exosister is that one, like, its engine going second is just not very good. Despite being a rank 4 deck, it does lock itself into Exosisters most of the time, and so you aren't able to play powerful going second cards like Exodon-Knight. I also think its engine is just one of the weaker ones when going second, because a lot of their monsters require them to stick bodies on the board to even overlay in the first place. The bodies they put out on the board are most of the time going to be removed pretty easily, and they don't have that many ways to extend past it. I think it's probably just safe to play at like a locals level. Next up, we got White Forest. I'll say White Forest is probably still a pretty underrated pick that we have at the moment. I'd probably put it at the very bottom a strong pick. It is similar to a lot of the combo decks that we have in the decent tier. It's able to put up a very scary end board if it goes first. It has a key weakness to like certain hand traps. But I think that the quality of the White Forest cards themselves, like the fact that you can play like the Asamina cards in it, you can play like you play the Diabellstar engine in it. Like those cards are still a very high quality, and I would say that card quality is probably what pushes White Forest for me into like into the strong pick tier. I also think that the White Forest deck does give better players a better opportunity to outplay their opponents. The engine of White Forest itself, I think, is a lot more flexible, and the fact that you are able to like I said, splash in the Asamina engine does raise the ceiling of this deck significantly. So while this deck is not without its issues, I do think that White Forest does have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of a combo deck compared to some of the decks in the decent tier at the very least. But next up, we got rank 4 pile. So this can include like Onomot, like Ryzeal. Like these decks are like not bad as well. Very scary when it's able to go first. Does also have a weakness to like common hand traps like Fuelos or Droll. But I guess one extra thing the rank 4 pile has going for it is that when it does go second, it's able to threaten a card like Exodon-Knight pretty easily. That sort of makes it so his engine is a little bit better when going second. But again, I think it just falls in a similar category as most of the other combo decks that we have down here. Next up, we got RDA. I think RDA's, again, falls into a similar boat as a lot of the combo decks that we have here. When these decks are able to go first and do their combo, they're probably going to be able to win the game. Like, there's no issues with that. But again, RDA has some key weaknesses to hand traps like Fuelos. Its engine is also not great when going second, in my opinion. None of the engine cards really do anything threatening, and it's pretty easy for the opponent to be able to remove the bodies and prevent them from synchro climbing into anything meaningful. One thing I will say, I guess this deck is fairly good at playing through non-engine, but again, it has that weakness in those higher impact hand traps, so I can't really put it any higher than decent in my opinion. Next up, we got Shaddoll, my beloved. I would love to say this deck is a strong pick, but unfortunately, I think that it probably just has to go squarely in the playable tier. The problem with Shaddoll inherently has always been, if it doesn't see a fusion spell, all the monsters are bricks and they don't really do anything. That being said though, I will be posting my version of Shaddoll in a couple of weeks or so after YCS Montreal is done, because I am prepping for that event at the moment. So if you're interested in seeing that, then make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. Like I said, Shaddoll just has a few too many bricks. It's also not able to play the most number of non-engine as well, which can be pretty problematic. And while yes, a card like Witness is still incredibly good, unfortunately, I don't think that's enough to really make it one of the best rogue picks that we have. Next up, we got Heroes. I think that Heroes, again, is similar to all the other combo decks. Go first, your combo is good enough to win. Go second, you're probably not going to be winning the game unless you see the right combination of hand traps or board breakers. Again, the Hero engine, I don't think is particularly great at breaking boards. It's not like they have no tools when going second in terms of their engine. But I will say, I think it's one of its other weaknesses is the fact that it isn't able to play the most number of non-engine as well, because its engine is so big. So that can be a problem when going second into some of the best decks as well. But again, like I said, with every one of these other like combo pile decks, not a bad deck by any means. When it goes first, it's probably going to be able to win the game. Next up, we got Memento. I'll say Memento is notably a bit better than a lot of the other decks like below it in the decent tier, because I think it is a deck that's able to play through hand traps a lot better, like the Charmies, Droll. They do have some impact against it, but Memento's the type of deck that I think with a good pilot can navigate those situations pretty well. He's able to either play around those hand traps pretty well or play through those hand traps a lot of the times, while also putting up a very layered and very scary end board. So I would say that Memento is one of those decks that I would almost say it's like a very strong pick and very underrated. But I think the biggest problem with Memento is that it is also a very engine-heavy deck. I think a lot of the cards can be pretty awkward to draw if you aren't already playing the game. And the fact that it's just so difficult to play at the highest level, I just think that I can't really put it any higher than decent. With a good pilot though, I would probably say Memento's a strong pick, but for the average player, I would say Memento is probably just like decent. Next up, we got like Fiendsmith Control or like Fiendsmith Piles. I would say any deck with the that can still play the Fiendsmith engine, so like Unchained, Yummy, decks like that are probably still going to be pretty solid. Able to set up Caesar, give some follow-up for the next turn. You can play Desert. You can try to set up Desiree if your deck wants a negation instead. So it's the engine is very flexible and still very powerful. But I think the biggest weakness of this engine is and always will be a card like Fualos. You can't really do the combo without giving your opponent like many draws. And so by adding Fiendsmith into like any deck, you're naturally making that deck a lot worse into a card like Fua. Despite all that though, I think any deck that's able to play Fiendsmith at the very least going to be decent just because of how powerful the Fiendsmith cards still are. And finally, for the last deck I'm going to be talking about, we have Tellarknight. This can be a very scary deck. It's similar to Earth Machine, where it can just straight up FTK the opponent if they don't have the right combination of hand traps. And similar to Earth Machine, that FTK potential alone, I think, just pushes it into the decent tier. If your opponent just isn't playing the right number of hand traps or is only playing breakers, this deck is going to be able to destroy them pretty easily. The deck's fairly consistent as well. Has actually seen a decent amount of success at like the biggest tournaments. So I guess for that reason, I probably have to put it at like very bottom of a strong pick, actually, just because it does actually have multiple tops during the past format. Whereas like a lot of these decks don't even have that, so I guess I have to put it in a strong pick tier. In my opinion, I think the biggest weakness of this deck is still going to be those high impact hand traps. I think going second as well as the engine is not particularly great, other than the fact that it can make Exosister because of its consistent FTK potential, probably more so than Earth Machine. I would at the very least put it at the bottom of a strong pick. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. I tried to talk about all the decks that have seen at least a few tops here or there in recent events. I also tried to talk about some of the most popular decks that I know people enjoy. If you still feel like I missed something, then let me know in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, all I ask is that you consider subscribing to the channel. It lets YouTube know that you enjoy seeing this, and it really helps me grow as a channel, which I appreciate. I also want to give a quick shout out to Card Trader. You can check them out using my link in the description below for 5% off your entire order while helping to support the channel. They're an online marketplace where you can buy and sell singles, sealed product, card supplies, things like that. And if you use my link, you'll not only be getting a discount, you'll also be helping to support the channel, which I greatly appreciate. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.